So, happy spring, everybody. Spring is my first day without boots in a while.
I have a prayer answered.
Okay.
My CAT scan came back and I don't have a brain bleed.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yay.
This time.
Wonderful. Okay, if you have just walked in here, the papers that are on here, they are from last week. So if you got a paper last week, it's the same one, but you can get one if you don't have one because we're continuing last week's lesson. It is a little bit different. I've changed the lesson so the paper doesn't exactly match anymore. But I'm going to start off by saying I love sheep, and I don't know if anybody else knows that or not. I'm not like real vocal about it, but I really do enjoy sheep. And I even have a collection. I brought a couple. This is my little sheep I got when we went to visit my son in New Zealand. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but when we went to New Zealand, they said there are 20 sheep per person in New Zealand. So there's a lot of sheep in New Zealand. And so I just felt, because I enjoy sheep, and two, because it was just such a symbol of that country, I had to bring this back. And on the bottom it says Nimri in New Zealand and Robert and Carol's 25th wedding anniversary is what it says. So, and then I have this one. I just brought a couple of different sheep. I even have sheep jewelry. I have a charm bracelet with sheep on it, for what that's worth. And believe it or not, I'm going to skip this here. I have a Pinterest board that I've been putting together for a long time, which is sheep pictures. And I'm going to show you a couple. So here's a few. I don't know how well you can see. Huh?
Did you ever sheep when you were a child?
No. Now, we don't normally talk about sheep in our day-to-day life. It's not part of our normal vocabulary. And probably I would venture to guess that most of us have never really been around sheep. I've never really been around sheep. But my fascination began years ago when we lived in Germany. Got the wrong one. Here it is. And we lived out in the country, and I tried to find a picture of it. And I know I have a photo somewhere. I know it's a slide, and I knew if I could find the picture, it would take a bit to even figure out how to make it come on here. But I looked online, and this is about as close as I could get because it looked a lot like this. And we lived out in the country, and we drove along country road every day to get into town. Robert drove it every day to get up to where he worked on the military. That's great. Yeah, I don't know if we'll try it. In the military base where he worked, and we passed his shepherd out on the side of the road every single day. He was out there every single day. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful drive. The grass was just lush, and there were brooks running through it, and the trees, and there was just no sense of time. You didn't feel like you were in any time. You could have lived in any time on the earth when you looked out there and saw the sheep with the shepherd. And the shepherd had this kind of a leather thing that went around him, and a little, like a cup here, and he would stick his staff right in that, and he would lean on it all day long. He never saw him sitting down. He was always leaning on this stick, watching out after his sheep. And if it was raining, he had on this big cape that went all the way to the ground with the hood on it. Like I said, I wish I had a picture to show you. Maybe I will. But it just felt like you're going back in time when you drove through there. And Robert and I used to look at each other regularly and say, don't ever take this for granted. Don't ever take this for granted. This is so beautiful. We're seeing it every day. Don't take this for granted. It's incredible. But I just drove by. I never stopped and talked to the shepherd. I mean, if I tried, I couldn't. He spoke German and I didn't, so I really couldn't have communicated with him. So I enjoyed the view from afar, but I never really got into the workings of his everyday life and what he went through and what he did. So I still don't know a lot about being a shepherd. So when we read in the Bible, the Lord is my shepherd, we can conjure up in our mind all sorts of different things, maybe pictures we've seen in books, and maybe you've actually been able to drive by a shepherd. But if you haven't, or most of us maybe haven't really spent very much time with sheep, we may not know exactly what David's talking about. But when David wrote the 23rd Psalm, he was a shepherd and he knew exactly what he was talking about. And he spent years and years tending his father's sheep. And the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, is not just some pretty little nursery rhyme. It's not, David had a little lamb, his fleece is white as snow. No, it was all about taking care of sheep. And it was a very big part of who he was. And as he's writing his psalm, he knows how dependent his sheep are on him. And he knows how incredibly dumb these animals are. I want you to listen to this news story. It's true. It really happened. Turkey's shepherds watched in horror as hundreds of their sheep followed each other over a cliff, says Turkey's newspaper reports. Hundreds of sheep followed their leader off a cliff in eastern Turkey, plunging to their death this week while shepherds looked on in dismay. 450 sheep fell 15 meters to their death in a ravine, but the rest of the 1,100 animals that followed their fall was broken and they did not die. Shepherds from a nearby village neglected the flock while eating breakfast, leaving the sheep to free roam. The loss of local farmers was estimated at $74,000. That was in 2005. So David knows, as he is writing his psalm, that these sheep are stupid. They are directionless. He knows that sheep will wander off and get into danger and get into trouble. He knows that they're very fearful and anxious animals. He knows that sheep don't do well on their own, and a lot of times they will not survive. He knows this as he's rating this. And knowing all of this, he said, "The Lord is my shepherd." David's not speaking as a shepherd in this passage. He is speaking as one of the flock. And he is saying, I'm a sheep, and the Lord is my shepherd. He is my owner, and he's my master. And David spoke with a strong sense of pride and admiration, his devotion. The Lord is my shepherd. I want to stop here, and we're going to take a little side journey, because I want to remind us that God calls us sheep. He calls us all sheep. We know this, but I want this lesson to be very personal to us. This is not just about David. Did you know that there are way over 200 passages in the scripture that talk about sheep? This is a theme that goes all through the scriptures. And Ezekiel, so I'm going to read just a few of them. I'm not going to read all 200 and whatever of them. But in Ezekiel 34, it says, "And they shall know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and that they, the house of Israel, are my people, declares the Lord God. And you are my sheep, human sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, declares the Lord God." Hebrews 13. "Now may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep by the blood of the eternal covenant, equip you with every good that you may do his will." Psalm 103, "Know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture." Psalm 79:13, "Then we, your people, the sheep of your pasture, will thank you forever and ever, praising your greatness from generation to generation." I'm going to skip the next couple. So when David was writing the psalm, it was very personal for him, because we don't live around sheep today, sometimes we miss the significance of these passages. But the people he wrote in that time, they knew what he was talking about. This entire psalm, it was written for us. It wasn't just written for those people, and it wasn't just written for David. It tells us how God spared no pains for the welfare of his sheep. God literally lays himself out for his sheep continuously. He, through his Son, is ever interceding for us. He is ever guiding us with his Spirit. He is ever working on our behalf. And it's no wonder that David took great pride in the shepherd. So that was just the introduction. For the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the study of God. And last week, we talked about the sufficiency of God. And we had 4 different points in that. And the first one was God is responsible for his creation. He made everything. And he took pleasure in it. It was good. The second one, did I say that right? Yes. God is independent of his creation. There's no other influences that made God, right? He is what he has always been. The third one, we are dependent on his sufficiency, that we live and we move and we have our being because of him. We exist because he's God. And then the fourth point, we find our completeness only in God. And I don't know if you remember last week, I said, I think this is the most significant sentence in the whole series, that we find our completeness only in God. God's sufficiency means that we find our completeness only in him. And then our class ended. So that's where it ended last week. And this is where I'd like to jump in and pick up. And what I'd like to do is just spend the rest of this class period talking about Psalm 23. We find our completeness in God. So when we read through the Psalms, we see David's intimacy with God. We see his knowledge of God. David had great knowledge of God, and David knew that God was his shepherd. He said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want." And if we put that into our own language, another way of saying that is, God's my shepherd, I have all that I need. He is enough. He is sufficient. And it's a very proud, positive, bold statement by David. He was utterly satisfied. He was perfectly content with his lot in life. And David is saying, you come to know God, who he really is, not who you think he is, who he really is. And you just let God be God, and you will have no lack. And many people are failing in life because they want to make God man. And we talked about this in the last couple of weeks, that his ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. But we need to let God be God. And when a sheep tries to make a shepherd into a sheep, the sheep are going to get really confused. And we need to shepherds, but as long as the sheep let the shepherd be the shepherd, then they have somebody to guide them and to take them where they ought to go. When we let God be God, then he lets us be as we're supposed to be also. I shall not want. I have all I need. I'm content in my shepherd's care. When the Lord is our shepherd, he meets every category of our needs. He meets our spiritual needs. He is sufficient to take care of our spiritual needs. David says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. And knowing a little bit about sheep kind of helps us understand that better, because sheep are very timid creatures. And they will refuse to lie down if everything is not well. If there's any fears out there at all, they will not lie down. They'll refuse to lie down if there's friction in the flock. They'll refuse to lie down if there's flies or parasites around. They won't lie down. They'll refuse to lie down if they're hungry and they're just not sure where their food's going to come from. So it totally depends on the shepherd and the diligence of the shepherd to make sure that these sheep are content, that they're not fearful, that they're not afraid. He makes me lie down in green pastures. In our lives, this carpet, this is like a carpet of green grass. This carpet of green grass it's peace, it's contentment, it's rest. And in our Christian lives, there's just no substitute at all for the awareness that God is nearby. There's nothing like our shepherd's presence to dispel all the fears in our life. And when my eyes are on my master, it's a place of peace. He leads me beside still waters. Why still waters? Yes.
I'm sorry, I just had an epiphany Friday night. I was laying in bed and I was giving God all of my cares and worries and stresses, and somewhere in the middle of that I fell asleep. And I woke up the next morning and I said, you know what? I said, I know we blame prayer for falling asleep and like blame ourselves, but letting go of those worries and handing them to somebody else is so relaxing. It's such a safe feeling.
It's a beautiful way to fall asleep. It's not something we should chastise ourselves about. It's a beautiful way to fall asleep, and it's a beautiful way to wake up. The shepherd knows that sheep are afraid of running water. They know that. And a sheep will literally die of thirst before drinking in rushing water because they don't swim very well, and they know that if they get caught in it, they probably would not survive. So many times a shepherd will have to take stones in water and kind of dam it up and make a little pool of calm water so that the sheep will come and drink out of it. And David's writing that God alone knows where the quiet, the still, the clean, the pure water is found that can satisfy his sheep. Because life can be a rolling river for us, right? Every day it flows so fast and so hard, and it becomes fearful at times. And even though this river of life may not ever slow down, the pool is always waiting for us. It's always waiting for us. It could be waiting for us in a song. It could be waiting for us in a sermon. It could be waiting for us in our quiet time with the Lord. But that pool is waiting, and it's a place where our all-sufficient God will grant us peace, and he will grant us rest. He restores my soul. And David knew what it was like to be cast down and depressed. He knew all about defeat. He knew the frustration of falling into temptation. He knew the feeling of hopelessness. And only those who have cared for sheep really, really know the significance of a cast down sheep. And that is the term used for a sheep who ends up somehow getting turned over on their back and they cannot get up. The sheep, when they get on their back, cannot get up. And they will frantically work and try to get up in this struggle. And it's a pretty pathetic sight to see a sheep like this. And there's a lot of things that go on. Gases build up and all that. And if the shepherd is not watching and not aware, they'll die. They can't survive. But the shepherd is not the only one watching on. Predators are watching on. Coyotes and cougars, they're very aware that a sheep who is cast down is very easy prey, and that shepherd has to be alert. That shepherd has to be watching to come to the rescue. And when that shepherd comes to that poor little frantic sheep's rescue, he will gently lift it to its feet, and he will roll it over, lift it to its feet, and then straddle it to kind of hold it up because it's very, very wobbly, and reach down and rub its legs to get the circulation going again and give it some stability. And it takes a very long time. It's a slow process because sometimes the sheep will start walking and collapse again, and then they have to do that over again. And the shepherd will, and the sheep is so frantic from the struggle that the shepherd has to talk very calmly and very gently to the sheep to just get its equilibrium back. So I want you to listen up here. Listen up. Just pay attention to this. If you don't pay attention to anything else, too many times we get the idea that when a child of God falls, when she's frustrated, when she's helpless, in some kind of a spiritual dilemma, or when we're cast down, when we are depressed, that our God becomes disgusted with us, fed up, disappointed, or even angry at us. But as we get to know our God, we get to know who he is, we get to know his heart, we find out that he has the very same concern for us that a shepherd has for his cast down sheep. I really, really hope this penetrates your heart, that you can really think about that. Our life is full of frustrations. But if we will let God be God in the middle of our pain, in the middle of our pressures, if we will submit who we are to who he is, he gives us back our soul. He gives us spiritual rejuvenation. He can take a messed up day and turn it into a glorious week. He can take a messed up month and turn it into a beautiful year. He can always turn triumph or tragedy into triumph because he restores my soul. God also meets our directional needs. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. There's no other livestock on the earth that needs more care, that needs more detailed, meticulous direction than a sheep. I wish I had time to tell you, and I don't, the stories. I was just talking to my father on the phone yesterday, and he was recounting stories when he was a child. He watched his father's sheep, and he was telling me all these stories, and I'm thinking, I wish I had time for this. But he said he literally spent hours, early in the morning till late at night, as a 6-year-old. For like 4 years, he did that, just doing nothing but watching his dad's sheep. He said, all I had was a gravy sandwich, and it was always full of ants, is what he said. And he said, we had no idea what we were doing, and a lot of our sheep died, and he said, I had to pull the wool off the dead sheep. I mean, he was telling his stories. And I remember years later when we learned that, and he'd become an elder in the church, and we're going, wow, a lot of God's great men had been shepherds, and now you're an elder in the church, and you really watch sheep. David knew firsthand that if a sheep was going to flourish, they had to be under constant control and constant guidance. And when a shepherd leads his sheep, that sometimes very dumb sheep will wander off the road, and the shepherd will have to leave the flock and go get them and bring them back, carry them back to the fold. And God does that for his sheep as well. He can take a lost sheep and make it found. And he can take wrong decisions and he can make them right. And this is another one of those things that I know when I was writing this week, it just made tears stream down my face as I thought about it. Because we are not stuck in life because of some wrong decision that we made. We are not stuck in life because of a wrong decision that you've made. God can make everything right. If you're going down the wrong road, we reconnect and he'll put us right back on the right road. But if he can make a bad decision good. If the Lord is your shepherd, he'll guide your life. If we simply let God be God, he will restore our soul. If we let him be the sufficient God that he is and simply do what he says, he'll direct us to the right place. And why? For his name's sake. For his name's sake. Because when we get there, we're going to give him the credit, aren't we? God also meets our emotional needs. David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. When a sheep get lost, sometimes they get in between mountains or crevices, and that shadow overcomes them, and they're terrified of night. And they get very, very frantic. They get terrified. And David says, we have these dark shadows that come over our life, and we think everything's bad. It's all bad. And sometimes we think there's just no hope. And God stands by with his rod and his staff to bring comfort. That rod was the club that the shepherd used to keep off the wild animals. And sometimes it was used to discipline the bad sheep too. And the staff was used to pull those animals out of the thickets or the poisoning weeds and such, and also to kind of guide them along the way, and occasionally at times to reach in and kind of give a little rub to a nervous sheep to let them know, hey, I'm still here. I care about you. And David knew what it was like to get caught in the thickets. He got caught in the thickets of immorality and murder. He got all tangled up in the shadow of death, and he had to deal with his sins. And he returned to God, and God's rod protected him. His staff pulled him back in. His grace covered him. The Lord is your shepherd. He can keep fear from overwhelming you. God meets our physical needs. You prepare a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. You've anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. And one of the ideas behind this is that the shepherd carried a belt and, a cloth and a pouch in his belt, and he had a little fodder and all that. And when a sheep was wandering off and he was having a hard time getting them to come back, he would open up his little cloth and put it on the ground, pull some fodder out there, and kind of reassure the sheep and tempt him back. And he made sure he had a little cup of water a cup that he could dip into water and give him some cool water and just kind of reassure him. We got food, we got water, come back with me. Huh?
What's fodder?
Fodder is just I would say probably like little pieces of stick and stuff that they would eat.
Dog treats.
Pardon?
Dog treats.
Dog treats, there you go, yeah. And the foxes and the hyenas would watch on too, but they couldn't get close because that shepherd was nearby to help them. Sometimes the flies would lay eggs in their ears. It was really horrible. And from the agony of that, they would beat their heads against the rocks, and there'd just been horrific agony, and it would cause diseases, and they would die from it, especially when the larvae in there hatched. And because of that, when any flies hovered by, the sheep would get just frantic. They get frantic. And the old remedy in Palestine is they took olive oil with sulfur and spices, and part of that was soothing, and part of it was a repellent. And the oil would bring relief. And I just want to point out here that it was impossible for a sheep to anoint himself. He couldn't. He had to have that shepherd do it for him. And we aren't either. We can be kind of dumb creatures too. And we, like sheep, get bombarded with little pests. Sometimes it's a text somebody sends us, and sometimes it's a comment somebody makes. And only the shepherd knows what we need when these pests are bothering us, when we're being bombarded. And he's the only one that knows what can bring us relief. The shepherd anoints his flock, and one of the things that he does is he anoints it whenever he needs it continuously. It's not a one-time thing, and our shepherd continuously anoints us. And it's an ongoing process. I'm sorry, I'm having to rush. I cannot believe how fast this time's going. So God is a good shepherd to his children. He is so sufficient that his cup is overrunning. And it doesn't depend on what the economy is doing, or it doesn't depend on recession or inflation. When we stay in God's way, he gives us our daily bread. He gives us what we need. And then that cup of contentment becomes real in our lives. Clearly, when the shepherd anoints his sheep, he does it lavishly, and God anoints us lavishly. And as children of the divine shepherd, we should be known as the most contented sheep on the face of the earth. Finally, God is sufficient to meet our eternal needs. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A sheep who is with a good shepherd knows that no matter what comes, goodness and mercy are always in the picture. They're always there. There's no difficulty that can arise. There's no dilemma that can emerge. There's no disaster that can descend on our life without eventual good coming out of it. He promises that. And goodness and mercy are new every morning. They are new every morning. You can't get up and say, I missed out on it yesterday. They are new. Mercy is new every morning. And even though we don't deserve it, they continually flow out of the good heart of our shepherd. The love of our self-sufficient one the one that loves his sheep, the one who loves being our shepherd. He loves being our shepherd. And God is not only good for us now, he is good for us through all of eternity. If you know Jesus, he is sufficient for all time. If you're down, he knows how to lift you up. If you don't know the direction you need to go, he knows the path to go on. If you're confused about how you're going to make ends meet, he's all you need to know how to pay your bills. If you're not sure about where you're going to live forever, he's all you need to get your eternity right. He's all you need to get your eternity right. Is there any part of our life that does not fit one of these descriptions? He takes care of our spiritual needs. He takes care of our directional needs. He takes care of our emotional needs. He takes care of our physical needs. He takes care of our eternal needs. Is there anything that doesn't fit in there? Yes, Ronnie?
It just occurred to me, we were talking about the church this morning, Robert, was stay in the church, stay in the church, stay in the church. That shepherd was bringing that sheep
Back to the fold. Yes. And you know, Ronnie, when I was doing this lesson, I thought of hundreds of verses and I thought of hundreds of ways, of that we could make the connections. And I think you could spend a year talking about this passage and all the ways that it really connects, because it is a beautiful psalm, and it's hard to compact it into this small amount of time. But you're right. He brought him back to the fold. All of these needs that we have, and God is sufficient. Our sufficient God is sufficient for all of our needs. He's sufficient for all of them. Everything we need is covered by his sufficiency. If the Lord is your shepherd, he is sufficient for all of your needs. So ask yourself, is the Lord my shepherd? Because only if he's your shepherd will you learn that he's sufficient for your needs. And only then will we find the completeness that we long for in our lives. Thank you.
Beautiful lesson.